Where are you? Are you sat in your car? Or on the bus making your commute to work? Just got home from dropping the children off at school. Or perhaps it's coming to the end of the day, you're doing those chores and settling down for the evening. And there's that thought, what do I want to do? Where do I want to go in my career? And that can be daunting, it can be overwhelming, because it could be the first time you're really thinking about yourself. And that can be hard. But that's what we're here to talk to you about in our podcast, about where do I start? I'm Sarah.
And I'm Emma.
And we're both careers advisors at Skills Jersey.
So you might have been asked that question, what do you do? And it can feel really uncomfortable when you're not proud of what that is that you're doing, or you feel like you've kind of lost your professional or personal identity around your career. But it's moments like that that can really give that kick, that inner voice telling us that something needs to change around this. But that question again might come, just how do I even start around this area? So this is what our podcast is about. Let's get started.
Hi, and welcome to episode 3 of Where Do I Start? In today's episode, we'll be looking at barriers that stop us from moving in the career direction that we want. What do we mean by barriers? We mean things that block us, our blind spots in some cases, things we don't see in some instances, or even acknowledge, but they can stop us from progressing. Barriers are personal. They're different for all of us. We're all in different situations. They affect us in different ways, but they're there at some point in our lives. So common ones, it could be a lack of confidence, it could be a lack of experience, and lots of other things, educational. It could be flexibility in the hours we work, and lots more. So we joined on this episode by 2 very inspirational guests. So thank you for joining us. We've got Stephen Coleman, first of all, from the studio at the Government of Jersey. And we've got Catherine Ruez. Thank you, Catherine, for joining us as well.
So we're going to be talking really frankly, really, just running over like we're saying, the barriers, kind of your own journeys and what you've kind of been through. So just to kind of kick it all off, whoever likes to go first, really. Do you want to just kind of tell us about your own kind of career journeys from when you left school to now? Yeah.
So I actually left school in 2014, just because of my situation at home, and I was working full-time at school full-time, living in a house share. So at that point, school didn't really become a priority for me. So I left, carried on working full-time, and then I met my son's dad and ended up getting pregnant and having a baby at 18.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, my career progression kind of stopped so I could become a mother. Then 2016, I had my daughter. So they were 11 months apart, which was challenging in itself. And from that point, I was basically a stay-at-home mom until they started nursery. And when they started nursery, it was amazing. I had time for myself. I was able to do some part-time work for a friend's cafe. And when they started their NEF hours, I got a part-time job doing 25 hours in a catering van, which was actually really enjoyable. Mostly for the experience to speak to other people. And, I had a really good relationship with my boss. I used to do weekend work for her, just like to help her out and help me out. And then COVID hit. And at that point, I just found out I was pregnant with my youngest. And the guidelines for pregnant people were to stay at home. And schools closed, so there was nowhere for my elder two to go during the day. I couldn't work anymore. And by the time we came out of COVID, I was on maternity, so I had to basically end my job and became a stay-at-home mom all over again. So in 2021, my partner, his health deteriorated and he had some issues with his job. So we started looking into basically changing roles so that I could go to work full time and he could be the stay-at-home parent, which is also lovely. And I started looking for things, wasn't overly sure about what I wanted to do or where I wanted to go, if I wanted to go back to school or have a job or, do an apprenticeship and start studying at the same time as having 3 small children. So I just started asking around for a couple of interviews, and yeah, I am now working in a nursery setting as an early years educator with 2 to 3-year-olds, which is in itself very rewarding because it's basically what I do at home with my children for everybody else's children.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
brilliant.
Wow, what a journey. But there's been some highs there, some lows, isn't it?
Yeah.
Roller coaster for you by
Very
the
much roller
sounds of it.
coaster.
Yeah. Yeah. But how did you feel when you took those initial steps, like when your children started nursery and you thought, oh, time to start looking maybe for you to go back to the workplace that way? How did you feel at that point?
I was terrified, to be honest, because at that point I was a single mother of 2 young children, and the thought of having to go into working, even though it's part-time and only 25 hours, dropping them off to nursery, then going to work, then being on time to pick them up. And if they were sick, I had to call in sick. And it's just a lot of pressure, isn't it? That you have to do everything and you have to do it perfectly. So once I kind of got into the routine of drop them to nursery, go do whatever I was doing at work. And my boss was so lovely and so flexible. And she was always like, they're sick, that's fine, stay at home. They're in for an extra day, come in and work a different day. I always made up my hours. She never just cut me off. She was probably the best person for me to get back into the workforce with because she was just so kind.
But having that supportive employer
Yes.
then who's there to listen and understand the situation.
Yeah.
So that was great that you had that from your employer. I can imagine that meant a lot as well.
It does. And we still see her quite regularly.
Oh, that's nice.
It is,
You've kept that relationship going. So what would you say, you felt terrified? What helped you take that next step, would you say, even though you had those feelings?
I was very lucky with the way I got that first job, because my partner used to go up to this mobile catering van for his lunches. So I used to go and meet him while I was at home. I was with Back to Work once a week, trying to find something I was interested in. And I just so happened to go meet him for lunch, and there was a job advertisement on the van saying, looking for someone to work some hours. And I just spoke to her and she was like, right, you can start next week. So I've been very lucky with the way that I've found these jobs, and it's not been so formal or serious. It's much more relaxed, and it was just a conversation instead of a sit down interview with suits and ties and all the other scary things.
Yeah. But I think you've made 2 good points there. You said you were lucky, but actually we make our own luck in some ways as well, don't we? So you were there, you saw the ad and you could have just walked away, but you didn't.
No.
You took the step, you had that conversation. And it sounds like you took the pressure off a bit as well in what would work for you, because you said it was relaxed, it was informal. And it seems like maybe that stopped it being such of a huge leap, having that conversation by thinking, okay, maybe it's just inquiring, having a conversation. Maybe at this
I think
stage.
that first step is always probably the hardest, to actually think, no, I'll just ask. I'm personally, I'm very terrified of being told no. Any sort of rejection, I'm like, oh, it's because I'm not good enough. It doesn't matter if the job role's not suitable for what I want to do. You just take it really personally. So when I went up and I saw the advertisement, and I'd been up a couple of times before, and my partner knew her quite well, so I was like, well, there's not really anything to lose if I just ask.
Yeah.
And that was my job for almost a year. And I still do some part-time work for her now, because she's got another catering business for the weekends for private events.
That's great. That's great. So what would you say if somebody's at home, having those feelings, maybe of being out of the workplace for a while and feeling that they either want to move back into the workplace or circumstances mean that they need to go back to the workplace, and having those feelings, feeling a bit terrified, as you said, at the prospect?
I would definitely recommend to ask for all the help you can get. I am probably the proudest person in the world, and I always think that I could struggle and do it on my own. But when I started looking for jobs in 2021, I threw in the towel almost, and I was like, no, there's not going to be a job that I'm going to be able to do. I can't fit it around the children. I can't put myself out there because I was scared. And I met with a couple of different people, one being yourselves. And, after speaking to somebody about how you feel personally, because I was putting myself down, to have the feedback of actually you can do it. And if you want to, then just try. I was like, oh, well, why don't I just try that? And I kind of changed my mindset around and thought, the worst they're going to say is no, and it's not going to kill me.
And that's great advice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great advice.
Yeah, definitely. And just when you mentioned about when we asked about, your kind of journey since leaving school, and you were saying, at that point school wasn't working, that's it. Has that ever come back? Have you ever felt that when you're saying you felt scared, that kind of feeling around education as a barrier? Or
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
It's always in the back of your mind when you apply for a job. I mean, I had very solid GCSEs, and it just wasn't feasible for me at the time to continue studying the way I was. And to pass, you would have needed to put a lot of time in. So when I go into an interview and sit down and discuss, I try to concentrate on things I have achieved instead of the things I haven't achieved. And I know it's really easy to go in and say, well, I didn't finish it because of X, Y, and Z, but really it doesn't matter. The dream would be to study for a bit and get maybe a higher education degree, or to complete a childcare degree, because I'm now in childcare. But at the moment, with the job that I have, I'm quite happy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's just brilliant kind of input there of just focusing really on what you have achieved, and you have done so much, and working around your circumstances at the time and what's manageable. I think that's just brilliant to kind of focus on that when you're going in, and everything that comes with that, like your skills and experience and different things as you go through it.
Yeah. Could you a bit about your story then, Stephen? Because that sounds
mine's
a real journey.
Mine's somewhat similar with the parenting side. I left school and had the ambitions of being a PE teacher. I went to college, did a BTEC National in sport. I then decided to go to California to be a football coach with every intention of being a PE teacher. And after 4 months in California of being a football coach, I decided actually I didn't want to be a PE teacher. And the pressure of just going to uni for the sake of going to uni for the experience, my parents were going to be paying for that, and I just couldn't quite live with it. So I came back and I just started working, paying rent and all the rest of it. So I worked in in Homemaker, if we remember that, a co-op, just on the shop floor, and sort of moved to Total Sport. Then I needed to work on Monday to Friday because I played football. So I went into recruitment, and all these decisions weren't decisions because I wanted to, that was the career I wanted. I just sort of fell into these because I felt like I sort of had to. And I worked in recruitment for maybe 6 years, and just sitting in an office was not me. So when I was at the last recruitment employer, I was just having a really, really tough time, struggling mentally, struggling to focus. And when you're in that headspace, all you think about is, that clock in the right bottom right hand of your screen, and you're watching it. And I would watch that every minute and think, wow, I've got another 6 hours, but I knew I had a passion in graphic design, in web design, in all things digital, IT. I knew that was my passion. Me and my partner were wanting to have a child, and before we committed to that finance, I needed to make a choice where I was going to go, because I couldn't leave a job when we've got a little one. So I decided that I was going to leave my job without another job and study very hard in graphic and web design and focus my full attentions in that. I come from a family who have a variety of different businesses. I've grown up, knowing only sort of business. So I set up my own freelance business in graphic design, but I kept learning things. It's just I don't know, part of the way my brain works. It can't shut off. It can't sit still. So I'd spend my evenings learning. And, one day I got a phone call from government asking me to help them out on a project, freelance. And yeah, I mean, 3 years later, I've changed from graphic design into sort of digital production side of things. And yeah, I'll just continue to learn and keep going and see what comes up next. But for the way I am, this is the perfect role. It's, I'm not sat behind a desk. I'm doing one thing in the morning, I'm doing the next thing in the afternoon, and in the evening I'm doing something different, and that's perfect for someone like me.
Yeah. How did you feel? You said you thought you wanted to be a PE teacher, and sometimes we can hold on to something because it gives us security, thinking I want to do this, and it's kind of secure. And when people ask you that question, what do you want to do? You feel quite confident, I've got an answer.
Yeah.
But when you don't have an answer, it can feel like, well, I don't know. I don't really know. How did you feel when you felt you didn't know anymore what you wanted to do?
Very lost. I mean, I'd committed 2 years at college, and even when I went away to America, that was it. It was PE teacher. I was nailed on going to go to university. That's what I was going to study, and I only seen my future as a PE teacher. And yeah, the realization, it was quite lonely because, again, all your friends, you've just got that pressure. It takes a lot to say no, but yeah, you have the pressure. All your friends have left to go to university. Do you just do it for the sake of doing it? But I didn't feel comfortable wasting those times, just studying something I wouldn't want to do. So yeah, it felt quite lonely. I felt almost like a bit of a disappointment, but to nobody, because no one was ever disappointed in me for making that decision. It was just myself, I think.
Yeah, expectations that you felt people had put on you put on yourself.
Yeah, I think so.
That was a very brave thing to do, but and what helped you with that decision to move forward, would you say, if people out there were in the same situation of making that decision?
The decision to not do
not
PE,
do what you wanted, what you said you want, to change your mind, to be brave enough to say, I want to change my mind now. I don't want to do this anymore.
I was pretty independent, but speaking to my family, my mum especially, they helped out massively, reassured that, you do you. You do what you want to do. You don't do what everybody else wants you to do. And you instantly, that makes you feel a million times better. I'm not here to perform for anybody else. I need to do what's right for me.
Yeah. So talking to the people around you then is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Just being open and honest.
Open and honest about everything is the best way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And do you kind of, when you look back at everything you've been through and everything, your journey so far, are there any, when you think of barriers like the ones we've kind of raised and talked about, are there like key moments where you think, yeah, I was facing that barrier then, or I overcame that barrier at that point?
The biggest barrier was probably leaving recruitment and going into something that I had never done before. I backed myself. I knew I could do it. And all the way through my working life, I've always done something similar to graphic design or web design or anything IT related. But I don't think at the time anybody had said to me, there's a job in that. And it was only until I was about 25, 26 that I realized that wait a second, there is a job in that. There's people who do this. I was creating signage at Homemaker as a sales assistant when they had a design team. And not once did anybody say, "Oh, you're good at that. Why don't you do that?" Yeah. So that leaving that job to go into no job, no money, and take on the pressure of making it work was big for me. So that was a huge barrier. And I had to not only had to make it work financially, I had to make it work for the sake of my son, because he was on the way at this point, and the plan was that I would become the stay-at-home dad and work in the evenings freelance. And for me to do that, I'd had to get enough skills to be able to do that. I'll never forget the day that I'd left, and it completely changed my life. completely. I don't think I'd be where I am now if I hadn't made that decision. Yeah. And again, who was there? My mum. When I spoke to her, she was like, "You do you. It's just, this is what you need. This is what you need."
Yeah, and that's just that importance of support, isn't it, from whoever it's from, is really something. And when, for both of you, when you kind of look back at it, was there one point you think, God, when I reflect, that was my most difficult period throughout this whole journey of, you know, you can look back and be quite proud that you overcame that part of your life?
There was one point whilst we were swapping over from my partner being at work full time to myself being at work full time, and from the 4th of January when I started full time till the 18th of January, which was his last working day, I basically ran myself into the ground working full-time weeks and trying to organize the children being picked up from school, dropped off from school, having somebody there to, you know, watch the baby who is still only 1. So I think those first 2 weeks where we were crossing over, I basically thought to myself, how am I going to do this? How am I going to do this for the next 2-3 years that I'm working full-time until my youngest starts nursery? It's like, this isn't feasible. Nobody can accomplish this because it's just impossible to be everywhere at once. But thankfully, my sister, my friends, my mum, everybody was around to help. I mean, his nana had him 5 hours a day, which really took the weight off. And looking back to January now, where I did those 2 weeks, I was like, never again do I want to do that. But the fact that we both pushed through and we got it done, and 8 months later, it's all settled down and we're into a routine now where I work and my partner's at home. We are both really proud of what we did then.
It's amazing, you know, a huge shift. And you could have at that point said, "Oh, it's too much," and given up, but you kept on going. And
yeah, there were definitely times where the first 6 months of being employed full time, the children kind of played on it a bit and they were like, "We miss you, mummy, and we want to see you." And I think as a parent, when you start full time, I mean, they were only 5 and 6, so they didn't really understand the concept of having a job. But they're like, "Why can't you be at home?" And I'm like, "Well, I have to go to work, and you know, we go to the toy shop and buy toys. How do we buy those? With money." It's like, "Where does the money come from?" And like, "Mummy has to go to work." So now it's a weekly thing of, "Did you get paid now? Can we go to the toy shop?" And I'm like, "Okay." But that adjustment for really my older two wasn't upsetting, but it was a difficult time. Coming home and they'd be like all over you and you've just been at work all day and you're like, "Oh, I'm really tired," but you kind of push through and you need to give them your time as well. So yeah, the first 6 months was basically a roller coaster of, do I want to be here? Do I want to be at home? But now that we've settled into a routine, you know, the summer holidays, we can take them out after I finish work. We live just across from the beach. We've got a puppy now. So we just walk across the road and let them run free on the beach, and they come home and they're like, "That was the best time ever." And I think those moments are what you look for, especially when you don't have as much time as you would like.
Yeah. Just add a puppy into the mix, Catherine. You got
yes,
a house with 5 children in and a puppy.
Yes, we now have a Jack Russell cross French Bulldog.
And how about for you, Stephen? Those kind of the difficult moments.
Difficult moments. I think it again would probably be that when I left my my role, I'm naturally a people pleaser. Sometimes I'll put people before myself, and letting someone down, like handing in a notice, to me would make me feel really uneasy. After I'd done that, you know, it was a great lift off my shoulders. But yeah, I'd say breaking down that barrier at that point was very difficult, where my head was at. And it actually, to be fair, it stayed with me because I almost never thought I would ever go back into an office ever again, or work for someone, or work within, you know, an enclosed space. It's weird. It's hard to explain, but yeah, just that feeling of being at a desk. That was really difficult, and I refused to sort of work full time for a long time. I'd worked freelance, but when people say that when you go for an interview, it's not necessarily just one-sided. It's also a time for you to see what an employer is like. And when I came to start working here with the team we've got now, instantly it was like-minded people. It felt comfortable. I've been to interviews where I've said no because it's just not quite felt right, and I wouldn't want to put myself in that position again. But yeah, it's almost like a shop. You're shopping, so you're trying to figure out, what you want, because it's important. You're going to spend a lot of time. So getting past that and going full time was huge for me.
Yeah,
and I definitely do not regret it. It's great.
Yeah. And I was just thinking with the office, it's quite an interesting thing about office, because it's something we see a lot with young people, that it's kind of like, no, I never want to work in an office. It's like, I want to be outdoors, or no, I can't do that. But like, when we say, our job's an office job technically, but you're out and about, you're moving still. So that can sometimes, I think the perceived environment can be a bit of a barrier for some people, when actually in reality it can be a bit different. And like you say, at interviews, that's places where you can get a sense of that. Yeah,
and you can ask the questions. You get a chance to ask questions in the interview, so you can ask questions. What's it like?
Yeah.
And you normally go through the office, you get to see it. I'd be able to tell if I wouldn't like something. But I liked what I saw when I came here.
Okay. I think that is a really important point, though, because quite often we say I can't or I wouldn't, but we haven't explored it properly. So it's just having those chats with people, isn't it? And just having a look at the space and taking pressure off yourself to say, this is going to be it. Maybe it's not, but just go explore, have those chats, see what it's like.
Yeah.
Which is important. Can I just ask you a question, Stephen? You said, when you moved, you knew you wanted to do graphic design, and you thought, I'm going to move into this. Obviously, that was a new area for you professionally. Yeah. What kind of steps did you take to get to that point?
So I told my parents that that's what I wanted to do, and they were all for it. And my stepdad in particular mentioned that he knew people within the industry and that he would give me their numbers or details to go and chat to them. Nothing more than that, because I just wanted to know, what I was getting myself into. So that's what I did. I got in touch with a couple of people, and I went and met them and just had a chat, and almost told me where I could focus my time, because I was learning and I needed to sort of learn pretty quickly. But I didn't want to waste time learning something I didn't necessarily need to know. And they told me to do, don't just sit around doing nothing, create fake businesses. Not like that. Create fake businesses in your head and design for them, create a website for them, write some copy, whatever. Just make a business in your head a reality. And a lot of my early portfolio is just made up companies. That's how you'd start. And then that would, if someone asked me to see a portfolio and my design skills, I would show them that, and they can see that I could design. And that's when I started to get my first clients. So those initial conversations I had with people in the industry were massive, huge. So now when anybody asks me, if they can come and have a chat with me, and if I could help, and if anybody's listening to this podcast, please feel free, because I'm more than happy to help in any way possible.
That's great, because, that is a popular area, and people feel like, oh, maybe I haven't got the skill set for that. And technology as well, thinking I haven't got that technical skill set, can pose a barrier for people as well. But it's having those conversations initially to see where you need to focus your attention and learning. And then in your case, it was developing that portfolio, wasn't it? And
it was making sure people knew that I could do the job. And if I didn't create any of that artwork, no one would ever have known that I could do it.
Yeah, and that's something a barrier is the kind of experience, isn't it? That we
Yeah.
see a lot is that sometimes it can be a bit tricky. You're caught in this catch-22. If you you need experience in that to go into it, but then if you work full time, you can't get the experience, or it's quite hard to do. So it's almost like creating your own experience, like
Yeah.
these for companies that don't exist, but you're building that and just kind of
Yeah.
creating that.
I think the in this industry, in the digital side, it could be somewhat different, where you can almost tell of someone's skill set, and put them in a position where they would be best. I wish someone back in the day could have seen me at Homemaker making those signs, and they could have said, "Look, you're good digitally creating digital content. Have you ever thought of this?" Or even, IT, someone could have said, "Look, you're good on a computer. You should probably look at IT." But no, unfortunately, no one said it. Had to figure that out myself.
But it's good you had those conversations with people to open things up, which is good.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, brilliant. So what advice would you give to anybody listening who feels a bit stuck, Stephen, from your experience? What advice would you give them?
Talk to someone in the industry, basically. Talk openly all the time. If they're stuck, you do you, I guess. Don't worry about the pressures of what other people may think. Obviously, you've got, people have the pressures of finances, so don't make any rash decisions. I know when I left recruitment, it was kind of rash, but I was in a position that I was okay. But yeah, just openly speak about it. I guess view your options, see what you can do. If that means talking to people within the industry and finding out what skills you can hone in on, then do it. You can do it at the same time as what you've got a job now, and you can smoothly transition into a new career. But
look what works for you.
And I think that's good about the time as well, because I think it's not something that breaking down barriers and maybe moving careers isn't going to happen overnight, and it does take that time to think, okay, well, maybe I am working, or maybe I'm doing this. I take the time to just explore this or chat to them and build on that slowly. So I think that's a really good point. That
and also speak to experts, because we all do very different jobs, but we all have relatable skills. Could be anything from writing to IT. You could pick those bits of skills and you could almost help someone in the right direction. But speak to people that could look at your profile and give you some advice.
So would you like to add anything to what Stephen said, Catherine?
Probably my biggest barrier that my advice to somebody would be is you'll never be in control of everything. Before I started applying for jobs, I wanted to know what hours I'd be doing. I wanted to know who is going to watch children. I wanted to know if I'm going to be home for dinner. I wanted to know everything so I could fix everything before I even had a job. This was just pre-thought before interviewing, and it gets to a point where you want to be so in control of everything that you say no to everything that you can't control to a T. So the biggest thing that I did was, it will be what it will be, and just kind of go with the flow and things fall into place. I never imagined that I'd be finishing at 6 o'clock some nights and 5 o'clock or 1:10 in the afternoon. And my shifts change every week. And that was never something I was prepared to do, because I wanted to know, I start at 9, I finish at 5 every day. So I'm going to be here for this, here for that, and I'll be done. And when I interviewed for my current job and they said it was shift work, I was like, oh no, can't do that. And I thought, well, why can't I do that? I put a block on myself in my head saying that it wasn't for me, when actually it was probably the most fitting role I could do at the time with my experiences being as a mother.
That's great. And I think, a lot of people we see as an all-age service, we see adults as well, and a lot are kind of parent returners. And I think there is that kind of confidence sometimes drops when you've perhaps been out of employment for however long, however short. And it's just that realization that actually, I don't know if this is what you experienced, Catherine, that reflection of actually from raising children as well. And you, Stephen, there's so many skills in that, it's unbelievable. And Did you have that moment where you thought, yeah, actually, there's skills from this that you absolutely can bring to the workplace?
So the way I actually applied for my job was I saw an advert on Facebook, and it was just after I had an appointment with you guys, and you were like, go ahead, just apply for it. You don't need to have 100 pieces of paper behind you. And I was reading the advert and I thought, reads books, sings silly songs, does silly dances, plays with toys, is happy to get muddy and dirty, looks at creepy crawlies. And I was like, I do this every single day of my life. How is this a job? And how have I only just found out? And I was like, well, if I do it every day, I looked at, because it was like what the children wanted and then what the adults needed. And I looked at the adult requirements and it was like, oh, experience would be preferred. And I was like, oh no, I'm not experienced working in a nursery. And I was like, but I basically have a nursery at home. I have 3 small children. I've got experience with children up to the age of 6 at the time. I'll just ring them. So I rang them. I spoke to them over the phone. They were like, oh, come on up for an interview. We'll just have like an informal chat. It's not like suit and tie and all of that. And I was like, well, okay, I'm happy to do that. And that was on the Tuesday, and they called me on the Wednesday saying, we've sent you a job offer if you want to check your emails. So I was in shock, to be fair, about the fact that they wanted me to be part of their team, but also really proud of myself that I put myself out there, because I read it and immediately said no in my head. And then I was like, but wait, if we forget about that bit and just go back to the skills that I can offer, then yeah, it is the right job for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you ever, as a father yourself, anything?
Do you know, I can only think of organisation because I was terrible when before my son was born with organising things, and in my current role, there's a lot going on and a lot of things that need to be in place and organised. So yeah, when having my son Ewan, when he was born, that all changed. It wasn't like you've got to learn it gradually. It's like, no. Everything's got to be organised properly. I was a stay-at-home dad from when he was 6 months to 2. So, there was all of the sensory classes, making sure his bag's packed with nappies and wipes and food. And tell me 4 years ago, before he was born, I would be not very good at that. I openly admit, but now I'm okay. It definitely has helped with organising things.
Great. So I think just listening to you both, some key messages are coming across, and the main one is speak to people, speak to the people around you, speak to your employer, and even speak, if you've got an area in mind that you'd like to try and work in, perhaps. Speak to people in that industry. You see that job advert, you picked up the phone, you spoke, you spoke to a prospective employer. So, and it can feel scary, can't it? When you think, oh, what are they going to think about me?
I think you kind of feel like walking into an interview for me. I felt there was a lot of, not judgment in a bad way, but they want to know things about you and how much do you want to share of your life. And it's not shameful to have a child so young, but leaving school when you're 17, just turning 18, getting pregnant wasn't the plan. I originally had a joining date for the Navy for the June the following year, and having to call my careers officer to say, actually, that it's a no-go now. I'm having a baby instead. Life doesn't always work out the way you expect it to, and not everything goes to plan. So it was just kind of all thrown together, and I was very concerned about what people would think about me having a child so young. Not just 1, 2. I did it twice. Everyone's like, you're brave. I was like, more stupidity. But I was young and I grew up very quickly, and I learnt a lot of things from my children, and I would never, ever change what I've learnt from them or the way that I've been privileged to bring them up.
Yeah, it's taking those steps, isn't it? And moving forward. And it sounds like you were really, courageous in taking those steps and saying, my path's changed, but I'm going to embrace it and step by step. Yeah, brilliant. Okay.
And I think we'll just ask you the question that we ask all the guests we're going to have on this series for both of you. It's just, what inspires you? What would you say inspires you in your work?
So in my current role as an early years educator, what inspires me is the relationships that I've built with these children. I really, really loved the nursery that my two children were at, and the staff there. It was like a little family. I used to go pick them up. They'd ask me how work was. They'd ask me how my day was. And we had a really personal connection. And even when my youngest was born, they were no longer at this nursery. And I still got email updates asking how I was recovering, how the baby was. Do you want to bring him up and we'll have a look at him? And the fact that I now get to build these relationships with other parents, and not only in a professional way, but also personally give my advice as a mother to them, it makes me feel quite proud that I can help other people, not just within my job role, but also outside of it.
Yeah. And I think that's really, we've talked a lot about that kind of network and people that support you. And I think, yeah, absolutely, the professionals and people that work in areas you're interested in, but also those networks that kind of grow organically and maybe aren't family or friends, that they're just as important. And your kids, themselves, they're not experts in an area, but they're there and they change and direct you in different ways. Absolutely. And how about you, Stephen?
No, I'm going to be well cheesy here, but it's going to be my team, I think. I play team sports. I know how important working as a team is to, get to the goal. And I work with some amazingly creative, hardworking people. And that, for me, I want to contribute to what we can produce. So yeah, seeing how well they work, how well we work as a team together, it just wants me to be able to provide more and more for them. And I'd hope the same the other side as well. So yeah, I'd say my team inspires me.
Okay. Yeah, great. Thank you.
Lovely, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're all smiling, look behind there. But I think that's really key as well to what we talk about in episode 1 about values and, what you do value in your career. And obviously you've mentioned sport and the team sport. So that kind of ethos of teamwork and being with others is obviously really important.
Very, very important for me.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you both.
Thank you. We're just going to do an activity now for people listening into this podcast who may be facing a barrier of their own. It's a guided activity. So if you are listening to the recording, you want to join us in the activity, you need a pen and paper. So feel free to press pause, go and get the pen and paper and come back. And it's just to hopefully help you find a starting point to overcoming whatever barrier you're facing. So please feel free, go and get that pen and paper and come back to us. Okay. So now hopefully you've got your pen, your paper. Now what I'd like you to do is be open and honest with yourself and write down one thing that is blocking you from moving forward. Write it down. This is your space. Write down whatever it is. Okay. So now what I'd like you to do is write down 3 positive things you could do to overcome this barrier. It can be small or it can be adventurous as you want it to be. 3 things. So for example, if my barrier was experience, maybe my 3 points could be for overcoming this barrier, looking for volunteering opportunities, speaking to people, networking. It could be, my 3rd one could be going to Skills Jersey for an appointment. Whatever they are for you, whatever your barrier is. Okay. So now you have your barrier, you have your 3 action points. Look at your 3 action points. For each action point you have, write down how you're going to make this happen and a time frame for this. Okay, the time frame is important to give yourself a deadline, because without this deadline, it's easy just to forget about it. Put it on your fridge and forget about it. So have this deadline. So hopefully when you look back, however you've done this, it could be a mind map, it could be a list. Hopefully at the bottom or somewhere on your mind map, you have circled a starting point for you. Okay.
So just another thank you to our guest today. You know, it's a really personal thing, isn't it? Time to talk about your barriers and your own journey. So we just really appreciate you just sharing that with us and the listeners. So thank you. And obviously just remember, if you are a resident in Jersey, you can always come and book an appointment with us. Just, it might be that you hear this and you think, oh, I know I have barriers, but I'm still not sure like what they are, or I need help kind of thinking how those steps to kind of overcome them. Again, no matter how small they are, it can be just small steps to get there. And we're happy to kind of talk that through with you. But yeah, so in the next episode, we'll be moving in, looking at the Jersey labour market. So having guests come in talking about changes that have been happening with jobs in Jersey in the different sectors. So yeah, we hope you've enjoyed the episode today, and we look forward to joining us on the next one.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Where Do I Start podcast, brought to you by Skills Jersey. We hope you've enjoyed it.
We'd love to hear your thoughts about today's episode, so please feel free to contact us either through our social media accounts on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn and Instagram, or you can email us skillsjersey@gov.je. Thank you.